On the 12th of October 2023, the Thompson family from Middletown in the state of Ohio approached the police with a video recording that later became key evidence in one of the most disturbing stalking cases in the history of the district. On the recording from a hidden camera installed in the children's room, a man could be clearly seen standing behind the window and watching the sleeping Emily Thompson. Eric and Laura Thompson, Emily's parents, installed the camera after their daughter had been unwilling to sleep alone for 3 months and claimed that someone was watching her through the window. The parents and a child psychologist dismissed these complaints as ordinary childhood fears and vivid imagination. No one took Emily's words seriously until there was irrefutable proof. "We thought it was just a phase," Laura Thompson recounts. "Fear of the dark, monsters under the bed, typical childhood problems. We tried all possible options: nightlight, checking the closet before bedtime, even a special spray against monsters. Nothing helped." The first signs of unrest in Emily appeared in July 2023. Emily, who had previously slept in her room without problems, suddenly began waking up screaming at 3 o'clock in the morning. She insisted on having seen a bad person behind the window who was writing something in a notebook. The parents examined the area around the house but never discovered anyone. "We live in a good neighborhood," Eric Thompson explains. 2 stories, fenced yard, security system. "We checked the outdoor surveillance cameras. Nothing suspicious. And Emily's room is on the 2nd floor. You can't get to the window without a ladder, which we would have noticed." In September, the situation worsened. Emily refused to enter her room even during the day, cried when attempts were made to put her to bed, and eventually ended up in the parental bedroom every night. Teachers at school noticed that Emily became withdrawn, often drew dark figures at the window, and constantly looked tired. "We consulted with child psychologist Dr. Rena Murphy," Laura continues. "She suspected that Emily might have heightened anxiety caused by some stress factor. Perhaps a movie that scared her, or a story she heard at school. We were advised not to emphasize these fears." Following the specialist's recommendations, the Thompsons tried to maintain a clear sleep rhythm and not support their daughter's fantasies. On the 5th of October, however, something happened that made them change their approach. Eric woke up in the middle of the night and heard a noise from the back of the house. When he looked out the window, he noticed movement near the garden shed. But when he went to check with a flashlight, he found no one. "I had almost convinced myself that it was a raccoon or the neighbor's cat," Eric recalls. "But in the morning, I found a pack of cigarettes under a bush next to the house. We don't smoke. Our neighbors don't either. That made me think that Emily might not be imagining everything." The next day, Eric bought a small camera disguised as a nightlight in the shape of an owl. He installed it on a shelf opposite the window in Emily's nursery. The camera was activated by movement and transmitted the recording to his phone. The parents told their daughter nothing about the camera so as not to increase her fear. "Honestly, I didn't expect to see anything," Eric confesses. "I just wanted to calm my wife and prove that no one was in front of the window. I thought I would show Emily the recording of the empty room, and that would help her deal with her fears." In the first 2 nights, the camera recorded nothing unusual. Emily woke up crying at 3 o'clock in the morning as usual and went to her parents. On the 3rd night, on the 9th of October, when the Thompsons reviewed the recording in the morning, they discovered with horror that their daughter's fears had a real basis. The camera, which was activated at 3:17, captured the face of a man behind the window of the nursery. He was standing on a construction ladder, leaning against the wall of the house and intensively watching the sleeping Emily. At some point, he took out his phone and took several shots of the room before carefully climbing down. "I felt the ground slip away under my feet," Laura recalls. "My daughter tried to tell us the truth for months, and we didn't believe her. This person was watching her, photographing her, and who knows how long this had been going on." The Thompsons immediately contacted the police but did not inform Emily about the incident. Instead, they moved her bed into their bedroom and explained this with renovation work in the nursery. The officers examined the recording and organized surveillance of the house. But in the next 2 nights, no one appeared. They told us they needed more information, Eric explains. The quality of the recording was not good enough to identify the man's face. The police advised us to install additional cameras around the house and continue documenting what was happening. On the 11th of October, the Thompsons installed 3 new cameras, one directed at the backyard, one at the side of the house where Emily's window was located, and a third in the nursery, but from a different angle. That night, at 3:14, the cameras recorded a man approaching the house again. This time the recording was much clearer, and the police could recognize details of his appearance. The recording obtained from the cameras on the 11th of October 2023 became the turning point in the investigation. On the video, a man of about 35 to 40 years could be seen, of medium height, in dark clothing, and with a baseball cap that partially covered his face. He methodically set up a folding ladder, climbed up to the window of Emily's nursery, and spent about 10 minutes there, photographing the room and making some notes in a small notebook. Most disturbing was how confident he behaved, recounts investigator Carl Jenkins, who was appointed as the main person responsible for this case. This was clearly not a spontaneous action. The stalker knew the layout of the house, the exact location of Emily's room, and apparently also the family's schedule. He did his business calmly, without haste, which indicated long-term preparation. After viewing the recording, the police intensified patrols in the area and installed additional cameras around the Thompsons' house. The parents were recommended to temporarily move to relatives, but Eric and Laura declined. "We didn't want to burden Emily even more with sudden changes," Laura explains. "Besides, this man could have simply hidden and waited for our return if we had left." Instead, the family completely changed the house's security system. They installed motion sensors, changed all locks, added bars to the ground floor windows, and reinforced the entrance doors. Emily now slept in the parents' bedroom, and in her room they set up a real video surveillance center. The police began identifying the stalker. They compared the recording with databases of local criminals, questioned neighbors, and examined the Thompson family's history. "We proceeded from the assumption that the stalker was somehow connected to the family," investigator Jenkins explains. "In such cases, usually not random people become the target of interest, but those with whom the perpetrator had contact." The first suspicion fell on Mark Davison, a neighbor of the Thompsons. The 42-year-old bachelor lived 2 houses away from them, and several witnesses noticed that they often saw him walking past their house. Additionally, he corresponded in build and height to the man in the recording. On the 15th of October, the police interrogated Davison. He had no solid alibi for the nights of the incidents, Jenkins says. But what really caught our attention? In his garage, a folding ladder was found that was very similar to the one used by the stalker. Davison explained his frequent walks by saying he was walking his dog and used the ladder for household work. He agreed to provide a DNA sample and fingerprints. He seemed genuinely surprised and concerned about the situation, notes Jenkins. But we could not rule out his involvement. While Davison was being checked, the police established round-the-clock surveillance of the Thompson house. 2 nights passed without incidents, which led the investigators to suspect that the stalker had noticed the increased security measures and might be temporarily keeping hidden. However, the situation changed drastically on the night of the 18th of October. At 2:45 in the morning, the cameras captured movement in the depths of the Thompson garden. A man who looked very similar to the one in the previous recordings moved carefully along the hedge. However, when he noticed a police car driving down the street, he quickly disappeared. "This confirmed our fears," says Eric Thompson. "He didn't stop. He just became more careful. And the most frightening thing, he seemed to know about the police presence, which indicated his knowledge of our actions." On the 19th of October, the results of Mark Davison's verification came in. His DNA and fingerprints did not match those found on the Thompson garden gate, which the stalker had presumably touched. Furthermore, a thorough examination of the camera recordings showed that the person in the video had a somewhat different build and exhibited a characteristic gait that differed from that of the neighbor. We returned to the starting point, admits investigator Jenkins, but now we had more data about the stalker. We knew that he operates according to a specific schedule, preferably appears around 3 in the morning, and is obviously familiar with the placement of surveillance cameras. The Thompsons, meanwhile, began to notice other disturbing signs. Laura discovered that someone was following her Instagram account with an anonymous profile and viewing photos, many of which showed Emily and the interior of their house. Eric found a strange letter in the mailbox, a blank sheet of paper folded in a specific way, which experts later interpreted as a potential marker of the stalker. "This man studied us," says Laura. "Not just our daughter, but also our habits, our daily routine." We felt like we were under a microscope, without knowing where the next step would come from. The police suggested another strategy, temporarily moving Emily to the nursery but leaving a doll that resembled her in the room. The goal was to lure the stalker into a trap if he came to observe again. The Thompsons agreed, but insisted on additional officers serving directly in the house. The night of the 21st of October became decisive. In the nursery, they placed a doll in Emily's bed, while Emily herself stayed with her parents. 3 plainclothes officers positioned themselves inside the house, 4 more in tactical positions outside. All were equipped with night vision devices and radios. At 3:02 in the morning, the cameras captured movement in the backyard. The stalker emerged from the darkness, but behaved differently than before. Instead of using the ladder to observe through the window, he went to the back door. The cameras clearly captured how he pulled out some tools and began to manipulate the lock. This was a turning point, explains investigator Jenkins. His behavior escalated from observation to an attempt to break in. We understood that we had to act immediately. The officers received the signal for arrest, but at the last minute, something startled the stalker. He abruptly ended his manipulations of the lock, raised his head as if he had heard something, and quickly disappeared into the darkness. The police organized a pursuit, but the perpetrator managed to escape through the neighboring gardens. He moved on a route studied in advance, notes one of the officers involved in the operation. He clearly had a retreat plan. This is not an impulsive perpetrator, but someone who prepared carefully. At the scene, the stalker left behind a backpack that he had apparently dropped during the escape. The contents of the bag shocked both the police and the Thompson family. It contained a set of duct tape, a rope, a sedative for Emily, some children's toys, and, most disturbingly, a detailed plan of the Thompson house with marked entrances and exits and the location of rooms. This was a set for an abduction, says criminalist Michael Rodriguez, who worked with the evidence. Judging by the preparation and the objects found, the stalker planned to take Emily with him. The toys and the sedative indicated the desire to calm her and prevent her from resisting or calling out. A careful examination of the house plan revealed another disturbing fact. Not only were the rooms marked on it, but also the exact position of the surveillance cameras installed by the police. This confirmed the fears of investigator Jenkins. The stalker was somehow receiving information about the course of the investigation. At this moment, it became clear to us that we were dealing with someone who either has access to police information or observes the Thompson house very carefully, explains Jenkins. We began checking everyone who might have such access, from neighbors to police officers working on the case. Special attention was drawn to a detail that had previously seemed insignificant. In the stalker's backpack, they found a receipt from the Morning Brew Cafe, which is located 2 blocks from the police station. The date on the receipt, the 20th of October, exactly the day when the investigators discussed the plan with the trap in the Thompson house. Checking the recordings of the cafe surveillance cameras revealed that at the time indicated on the receipt, a man was there who matched the description of the stalker. He sat at a table next to a group of police officers who were not involved in the investigation but possibly discussing the case. Meanwhile, DNA analysis of the objects from the backpack yielded an unexpected result. The genetic material partially matched Eric Thompson's DNA, indicating possible kinship. This was a real shock for all of us, recalls Laura. We couldn't understand how this could be possible. Eric was adopted in early childhood and had no contact with his biological family. After receiving the DNA results, he agreed to provide more information about his origins. I only knew that I was born in Cincinnati and my biological parents gave me up at birth, he tells. I never tried to find them, since I consider those who raised me as my real parents. The police gained access to Eric's sealed adoption records and discovered that he had a biological brother who was born a year later and also given up for adoption, but into a different family. The brother was named Robert Clark, and his last known address was a city only 30 miles from Middletown. The verification revealed a match, says investigator Jenkins. Robert Clark, 38 years old, had a criminal record for trespassing and stalking. He was released from prison 6 months ago, and since then, his whereabouts were unknown. The photo of Robert from the police database confirmed the match with the person in the video recordings. It was the same stalker. But the most sinister fact came to light during further investigation of his past. Clark was obsessed with the idea of reuniting his real family, explains psychiatrist Dr. Elizabeth Hope, who studied his case. After his release from prison, he somehow learned about the existence of his brother, tracked him down, and apparently decided that his niece belongs to him as part of the family. In Clark's apartment, which the police discovered and searched on the 23rd of October, they found a true surveillance archive. Hundreds of photos of the Thompson family taken in the last 6 months, maps of their movements, recordings of conversations overheard near the house, and most disturbingly, a completely furnished children's room with toys, clothes, and even a nameplate, Emily, on the door. This was a room for Emily's long-term accommodation, concludes investigator Jenkins. Judging by the preparation, Clark was not planning an abduction for ransom purposes or short-term detention. He was preparing to take Emily to himself forever, probably assuming that he had some kinship rights to her. But the most shocking discovery was made in the basement of Clark's apartment. In an isolated room, hidden behind a false wall, the police discovered video surveillance equipment connected to several screens. They transmitted real-time images from cameras inside the Thompson house. Somehow he gained access to our security system, says the shaken Eric. The whole time he was not only watching us from outside, he was seeing us inside our own home. Cybersecurity experts brought into the investigation confirmed the worst fears. Robert Clark had hacked the Thompsons' wireless surveillance system even before they installed additional cameras. Essentially, he was monitoring their every step, including the preparation of the trap on the 21st of October, which explained why he changed his usual approach that night. Despite extensive searches, Robert Clark remained at large. The police organized round-the-clock surveillance of the Thompson house and moved the family to a safe location. The case gained national attention, and photos of Clark appeared on all news broadcasts. On the 30th of October 2023, 9 days after the discovery of the secret room, an incident occurred that made everyone hold their breath. At 3:17 in the morning, exactly at the time when the stalker normally appeared at Emily's window, the cameras in the empty Thompson house captured a familiar figure slowly climbing the ladder to the child's bedroom window. The appearance of Robert Clark in the empty Thompson house at 3:17 in the morning on the 30th of October was not a coincidence, but the culmination of a carefully planned police operation. After discovering his apartment with an Eerie children's room and surveillance equipment, the police developed a multi-stage plan for his arrest. We understood that we were dealing with an extremely cautious and prepared criminal, explains Police Captain Michael Rodriguez, who led the operation. He had hacked our surveillance system, studied the daily routine of both the family and police patrols. We had to outwit him on his own field. A key element of the plan was disinformation. The police deliberately created the impression that the Thompson family had moved to a safe location and that the house itself stood empty under minimal surveillance. In reality, more than 20 plainclothes officers were positioned in and around the house, including snipers and arrest specialists. The Thompsons had indeed left the house but remained under round-the-clock protection in the city. We laid out bait for him, Rodriguez continues. Knowing that he could intercept our conversations, we deliberately arranged a leak of information about the patrol schedule that supposedly left a window open between 3 and 3:30 in the morning. This was his usual appearance time, and we calculated that he would use this opportunity. The operation began on the evening of the 29th of October. The police demonstratively reduced the visible presence around the house and created the illusion of relaxed surveillance. In the house itself, in Emily's children's room, a doll was placed that imitated a sleeping child, and the lighting system was programmed to maintain the rhythm usual for the family. Our main goal was not only to catch him, but also to collect irrefutable evidence of his intentions, explains Prosecutor Janet Connors, who advised the police on legal aspects of the operation. We needed concrete evidence of planning an abduction to guarantee a maximum prison sentence. The waiting lasted all night. The police officers positioned at strategic points in and around the house maintained absolute silence and minimal movement. Special Operations Officer James Thornton, who was located in the children's room closet, later recounted, "These were the most tense hours of my career. We knew he could appear at any moment and that he was potentially dangerous. At 2:58 in the morning, a perimeter sensor at the property boundary registered movement. Surveillance cameras in infrared mode showed a figure moving along the hedge, the familiar silhouette of Robert Clark. He wore dark clothing, a knit cap on his head, gloves on his hands, and a bag over his shoulder. His movements were cautious but confident. He moved like someone who knows exactly where he's going and what he's doing," recalls Officer Sarah Lockhart, who monitored the camera transmission. "He constantly stopped, listened, checked the surroundings. This was not an impulsive criminal, but a methodical hunter on the prowl. Clark took almost 15 minutes to circle the perimeter of the house and check for possible observation points or ambushes. Then, satisfied with the inspection, he took the familiar folding ladder from his bag and placed it under Emily's room window. At 3:17, exactly at the same time as in all previous nights, he began to climb up. This was almost ritual behavior," comments psychologist Dr. Rachel Stevens, who advised the police. "The attachment to a specific time indicates compulsive personality traits and a deep symbolic meaning of this moment for the perpetrator." When he reached the window, Clark did not look inside as he had done before. Instead, he took a small tool from his bag that resembled a glass cutter and began working on the window frame. This was the moment the police officers had been waiting for, the transition from observation to active actions to break into the house. The special unit commander gave the signal for arrest. Simultaneously, powerful searchlights switched on, illuminating the house and yard. Over a loudspeaker came the demand to surrender and come down from the ladder with raised hands. Clark's reaction surprised even experienced police officers. Instead of panicking or fleeing, he abruptly turned on the ladder, pulled a pistol from his bag and shot at the nearest searchlight, destroying it. Then he jumped with unexpected agility from the ladder from the height of the second floor and rushed to the hedge. "He moved like a trained fighter," recalls Officer Jack Wilson, who participated in the operation. "Everything happened so quickly that we barely had time to react. His speed and determination surprised us." A chase began on the grounds around the house. Clark, obviously familiar with the layout of the neighborhood, jumped over fences, worked through bushes, and changed direction several times to confuse his pursuers. Twice he stopped to shoot at approaching police officers and forced them to take cover. The decisive moment came when Clark tried to climb over the fence that separated the Thompson property from the neighboring property. Officer Maria Gutierrez, who had taken position on the other side, fired a warning shot and ordered him to surrender. Instead of obeying, Clark aimed the weapon at the officer. Gutierrez was forced to fire precisely and wounded him in the shoulder. Even after the injury, he tried to resist, reports Gutierrez. It took 3 officers to disarm him and handcuff him. The whole time, he said not a word, but only looked at us with a kind of cold rage. The arrested Robert Clark was immediately brought to the hospital under reinforced guard. The injury was not life-threatening, but required surgical intervention. After the operation, he was transferred to the prison ward of the hospital, where he finally began to speak. "You still don't understand it." His first words to Investigator Jenkins were without any emotion. "She belongs to me. This is my family, my blood. You have no right to keep us separated." The search of Clark's bag, which he had dropped during the flight, provided the investigation with shocking evidence of his intentions. It contained a sedative in a syringe, a children's blanket with Emily's embroidered name, forged documents in the name of Robert Thompson with Emily as his daughter, bus tickets to Mexico, and a large sum of cash. This was a complete set for an abduction and disappearance, concludes Captain Rodriguez. He planned to take Emily and leave the country immediately with forged documents. Given his obsession and careful preparation, we are certain that it would have been extremely difficult to find her if he had succeeded in implementing his plan. The successful arrest of Clark enabled the Thompson family to breathe a sigh of relief. Eric, Laura, and Emily could finally return home. However, the psychological consequences of the stress they had experienced continued to have an effect. Emily was still afraid to sleep in her room, and Laura suffered from panic attacks. "Nothing will be the same as before," admits Eric. "Even knowing that he is behind bars, we cannot shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak in the house, every shadow at the window triggers instinctive fear." The investigation into the circumstances of the case was continued. The investigators discovered that Clark's obsession with his biological brother had already begun in prison, where he obtained access to his adoption file. After his release, he hired a private investigator who helped him find Eric Thompson. Originally, his motivation might have been innocent: the desire to reunite with his only blood relative, explains psychiatrist Dr. Stevens. But Clark has severe mental disorders, including a delusional disorder and an antisocial personality. His notion of family and belonging is deeply distorted. Records from the hard drive seized from Clark's apartment showed the true extent of his obsession. He had been observing the Thompson family for more than a year, long before Emily began complaining about the man at the window. The computer specialist discovered a systematic archive with thousands of photos, conversation recordings, and even copies of the family's personal documents, from medical records to bank statements. A particularly disturbing discovery was Clark's detailed diary, in which he described his right to Emily and plans for her rescue from the wrong family. The entries became increasingly delusional and paranoid over time, and often contained mentions of a sign he had received in a dream that pointed to 317 as the sacred time of reunion. "We are dealing with a person who has completely lost touch with reality," concludes Dr. B. Stevens. He has created an alternative reality in which his actions are not only justified, but also necessary to restore justice. On the 10th of November, the first court hearing in the Clark case took place. He was charged with attempted kidnapping, unlawful entry, stalking, illegal weapon possession, assault on police officers, and resisting arrest. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 30 years in prison. The defense demanded a psychiatric evaluation, and claimed that Clark had been mentally incompetent at the time of the crimes. Judge Alexandra Martinez ordered a comprehensive psychiatric examination whose results were to be presented within 30 days. Meanwhile, further investigations brought new disturbing details to light. The analysis of Clark's computer showed that he had not only searched for information about the Thompson family, but also about other children approximately the same age and with similar appearance to Emily. On his hard drive, folders were found with the names of 4 other girls, containing their photos, school addresses, and other personal information. This has led us to reconsider our understanding of his motives, admits investigator Jenkins. Possibly his obsession with Emily was not exclusively connected to blood relationship as we originally assumed. There are reasons to believe that this is part of a broader and more disturbing behavioral pattern. When the investigators began to contact the families of other children from Clark's list, they found that 2 of these girls had also complained about a strange man near their houses at night. One family had even filed a report with the police about a suspicious man who had been observed several times photographing their house. But for lack of concrete evidence, the case was not pursued. These discoveries led to the assumption that Emily Thompson might not have been the first and only target of Clark. He possibly selected potential victims according to certain criteria, and the relationship with Eric Thompson was only a convenient justification for his obsession in this particular case. It seems that we are just beginning to understand the true extent of the situation, says Prosecutor Connors. We are not dealing with an isolated incident, but with the systematic behavior of a serial stalker who could pose a threat to several families simultaneously. On the 15th of November, an incident occurred that caused the investigators to reconsider their assumptions once again. A prison employee where Clark was being held awaiting his trial discovered strange symbols on the wall of his cell, the same ones that had been found in his apartment in the so-called Emily room. Next to the symbols were the words 3, 17, she waits, I will come. Considering the fact that Clark was under constant observation and had no access to the outside world, this note caused serious concern. The prison administration reinforced the guard and ordered round-the-clock surveillance of his cell. However, the psychiatrist who evaluated his condition suspected that the note might not be a threat, but a sign of deep psychosis. He probably really believes that he can somehow come to Emily despite physical barriers, explains Dr. Alan Fisher, who conducted the evaluation. This testifies to a serious detachment from reality and suggests a possible delusional disorder with elements of magical thinking. On the 17th of November, just when it seemed that the situation was finally under control, the Thompson family experienced a new shock. When Laura returned home with Emily after visiting the psychologist, she discovered a children's drawing on the kitchen table that had not been there before. The drawing showed a girl who resembled Emily holding the hand of a large man, and at the bottom was written in uneven, childish handwriting, Uncle Robert comes at 3:17. My legs gave out, Laura recalls. I knew exactly that this drawing was not there when we left the house. Emily had never drawn anything like that and didn't even know Clark's name. We had never mentioned it in her presence. The police immediately checked the house and the security system. All doors and windows were securely locked. The alarm system was activated. The cameras had registered no intrusion. Furthermore, checking the camera in the prison confirmed that Robert Clark was under observation in his cell the entire time. It was impossible, says investigator Jenkins. Nobody could have entered the house unnoticed with such a security system. But the drawing was real and somehow appeared. Crime technicians analyzed the drawing and determined that it had indeed been made by a child's hand and was not an imitation. The fingerprints on the paper belonged only to Laura, who had found the drawing and were too fresh for the document to have been lying in the house for long. Emily denied when shown the drawing that she had made it. Furthermore, she showed clear signs of fear and unrest and refused even to touch the paper. The child psychologist who worked with Emily confirmed that her reaction was sincere. She really did not remember drawing this. At this point, we began to consider alternative versions, admits Jenkins. Did Clark possibly have an accomplice we knew nothing about? Or did someone in the Thompson house, perhaps a family member or a friend, have something to do with the appearance of the drawing? The police checked all surveillance camera recordings again, including those installed in the house. This time they examined not only the period immediately before the discovery of the drawing, but also the preceding days. What they found made everyone doubt the correctness of their previous conclusions. On the recording from the 16th of November at 3:17 in the morning, it can clearly be seen how Emily gets out of bed and goes to the kitchen as if in a trance. There she sits at the table and draws something for about 15 minutes before returning to her room. In the morning, she showed no signs of remembering her nocturnal activities. This is a case of somnambulism or sleepwalking, explains Dr. Nicole Chang, a specialist in sleep disorders in children who was consulted for advice. In the state of deep sleep, some people are able to perform quite complex actions without being aware of it or retaining memories of it after waking up. But this explanation left the main question open. How did Emily know the name Robert Clark, and why did she draw it at 3:17, exactly at the time that the stalker so obsessively repeated? The family assured that they had never discussed these details in Emily's presence. The investigators returned to analyzing the surveillance camera recordings in the Thompson house from recent months, exactly the recordings that Clark, as they knew, had access to. They searched for moments when details of the case might have been discussed in the house that Emily could have accidentally heard, and they found something unexpected. On the recording from the 25th of October, when the parents thought Emily was sleeping soundly, she can be seen quietly going down the stairs and stopping at the ajar door to the living room. Inside, Eric and Laura are talking with investigator Jenkins and discussing details of the case, including Clark's name and his obsession with the time 3:17. Children often hear and understand much more than we think, comments child psychologist Mary Dowson. Even when information seems incomprehensible or frightening to them, they can integrate it into their fears, games, or as in this case, into a state of sleepwalking. This discovery offered a rational explanation for the appearance of the drawing, but did not reduce the family's concerns. The fact that Emily had internalized the fear of Uncle Robert so deeply that it manifested even in her subconscious spoke of serious psychological trauma. This is not the end, but only the beginning of a long healing process, emphasizes Dr. Dowson. Even when the physical threat is eliminated, emotional scars remain, especially in children whose sense of security in the world is still developing. The Thompson family faced a long path to restoring normal life. Although Robert Clark was safely isolated, his psychological presence in their house was still palpable. Particularly disturbing was that Emily, who previously woke up every night from fear, now slept peacefully. But exactly at 3:17 every night, she sat up in bed for a few minutes with open eyes, looked toward the window, and then lay down, again without remembering it in the morning. We have been told that this could be a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, explains Laura. Her body has remembered the time of danger and continues to react to it, even though the conscious mind tries to forget. Meanwhile, the investigations continued to reveal new aspects of Robert Clark's story. The police discovered that before his imprisonment, he had worked as a technical specialist in a company that installed security systems. This explained his ability to hack surveillance cameras and bypass the alarm system in the Thompson house. A more disturbing discovery was a series of unsolved stalking cases in 3 neighboring districts that coincided chronologically with the periods when Clark was free. 5 cases from 2015 to 2017, before his previous arrest, and 2 more in the last 6 months after his release, had a similar signature. All involved observing children through bedroom windows at night. It seems that the Thompson case is only the tip of the iceberg, says Captain Rodriguez. With each day, we find more evidence that Clark may have been a serial stalker who possibly evaded justice for years. On the 20th of November 2023, exactly at 3:17 in the morning, the cameras in Robert Clark's prison cell recorded a strange incident. The prisoner, who normally slept at this time, suddenly sat up on his cot, turned toward the wall where the symbols were drawn, and began monotonously repeating, "I see you, Emily. I am coming to you." After a few minutes of this strange monologue, he lay down again and fell into sleep. And in the morning, he did not remember the incident. At the same moment, Emily in the Thompson house also sat up in bed and whispered while looking toward the window, "I see you, Uncle Robert. I know you are coming." This eerie synchronicity, recorded by surveillance cameras at 2 different locations, posed a new, disturbing question to the investigators. What if the connection between the stalker and his victim is more complex and deeper than they had suspected? The synchronous behavior of Emily Thompson and the imprisoned Robert Clark prompted the investigators to reconsider the nature of their approach to the case. Captain Rodriguez formed a special group that included psychiatrists, behavioral analysis experts, and child psychology specialists. The main task was to understand the nature of this disturbing connection and protect Emily from further psychological influence. "We are facing a situation that goes beyond an ordinary criminal investigation," admits investigator Jenkins. Physically, Clark is isolated and poses no immediate threat. But psychologically, he somehow continues to influence Emily, and we must understand the mechanism of this influence. Dr. Eleanora Reed, leading specialist in forensic psychiatry, proposed a theory called the mirror effect. In some cases, a specific psychological connection forms between stalker and victim, especially when it involves children. The victim unconsciously begins to mirror the stalker's behavioral patterns as a protective mechanism, literally becomes a mirror to anticipate and control the source of the threat. This theory was confirmed by a deeper examination of Clark's medical history. In his psychiatric file, created during his previous imprisonment, a tendency toward ritualistic behavior with fixation on specific times was noted. Particularly revealing was the note that Clark regularly woke up at 3:17 in the morning and claimed he heard a call. The time 3:17 had special, almost mystical significance for him, explains Dr. Alan Fisher, who examined Clark's case. He believed that at this time the boundary between worlds becomes thinner, and it becomes possible to establish a special connection with those he considered his. Of course, this is a delusional belief, but for him, it was absolutely real. The team of psychologists suspected that Emily, who had been under Clark's observation for many months, had unconsciously internalized his behavioral patterns. Her awakening at 3:17 and the statements that were identical to Clark's words were the result of psychological trauma and a peculiar attempt at protection, to control what could not be prevented. To test this theory, Dr. Reed proposed a simple but effective experiment. With the parents' consent, Emily was moved to a different bedroom. The furniture was completely rearranged, and the daily routine was changed, including bedtime. If the connection with Clark was only a psychological projection and nothing more sinister, these changes should disrupt the established pattern. The first results were encouraging. In the new environment, Emily slept more peacefully and her nocturnal awakening at 3:17 stopped. However, the joy was premature. On the third night, Emily sat up in bed again exactly at 3:17, although she did not speak any phrases. This prompted the researchers to look for deeper explanations. Psychological traumas leave traces in the body as well as in consciousness, explains child psychologist Dr. Sarah Cohen. Emily's organism has literally stored the time of danger on a cellular level. This is known as somatic memory and can persist long after the elimination of the threat source. In prison, work was also conducted with Clark. A team of psychiatrists, including Dr. Fisher, began a series of intensive therapeutic sessions to understand the roots of his obsession with the Thompson family, and especially with Emily. Gradually, they began to reconstruct his life story, which was full of traumatic events and psychological deformations. Clark grew up in an extremely dysfunctional environment, reports Dr. Fisher. His biological mother suffered from severe mental disorders and gave up both sons. Before his adoption, he spent the first 5 years of his life moving between foster families, where he was often exposed to neglect and emotional abuse. Unlike his brother Eric, who was adopted by a stable, loving family, Robert came to people who exploited him for receiving foster care benefits. His foster parents regularly locked him in the dark basement for the smallest offenses, sometimes for several days. Symbolically, the door to the basement always opened at 3:17 in the morning when the foster father returned from the night shift. This time point became for him a paradoxical symbol of both fear and salvation, explains Dr. Reed. The moment when imprisonment ended, but a new cycle of uncertainty and potential punishment began. When Clark was 14 years old, his foster parents died in a car accident. He found himself back in the system, but now as a problematic teenager with a history of aggressive behavior and escape attempts. By 18, he had developed a serious personality disorder with signs of narcissism, paranoid tendencies, and the inability to form healthy emotional bonds. His first encounter with the law took place at the age of 22, reports investigator John Morgan, who examined Clark's criminal history. He stalked his ex-girlfriend who had ended the relationship with him. Significantly, he appeared at her window exactly at 3:17 at night, claiming he was checking if everything was all right with her. This was followed by a series of arrests for stalking, trespassing, and threatening. The victims were usually women who had rejected his approaches, or families with children who, according to his statement, needed his protection. Psychiatric evaluations repeatedly found a personality disorder, but Clark always refused treatment, claiming that everything was fine with him. The world around him was broken. A turning point in his life came in prison, where he served a 3-year sentence for stalking and trespassing. There, he gained access to his adoption documents and learned of his brother's existence. This discovery triggered a new obsession, finding the only real relative and reuniting his true family. For people like Clark, with unstable identity and without healthy bonds, the idea of blood relationship can become a fixation, explains Dr. Reed. It is a concrete, tangible concept to cling to in the search for meaning and belonging. After his release, Clark hired a private detective who helped him find Eric Thompson. Originally, he planned to simply introduce himself and offer to restore familial relations. However, when he saw that Eric had a daughter, his plans changed. In his distorted perception, Emily became the symbol of the family he never had, Dr. Reed continues. He convinced himself that he had more rights to her than the strangers who were raising his niece. A classic case of narcissistic projection and delusional conviction of one's own righteousness. Instead of making direct contact, Clark began observing the family, gradually transitioning from simple information gathering to more invasive forms of surveillance. He believed that he was studying his true family and preparing for the reunion, explains Dr. Fisher. In his perception, this was not persecution. He was protecting and preparing to save Emily from a world he regarded as hostile. In December 2023, the psychiatric examination of Clark was completed. Experts diagnosed him with a combination of several severe disorders: narcissistic personality disorder, delusional disorder with paranoid elements, and obsessive-compulsive traits. Nevertheless, they concluded that he understood the illegality of his actions, which made him legally accountable. He was not under the influence of a psychotic episode, concludes Dr. Reed. He planned his actions methodically, took precautions, avoided detection. His disorders explain the motives, but they do not take away his responsibility for the conscious decision to break the law. The trial against Robert Clark began on the 15th of January 2024 and attracted considerable public attention. The prosecution presented extensive evidence of his guilt, including surveillance materials found in his apartment, recordings from surveillance cameras, witness testimonies, and expert opinions from psychiatrists. The defense, acknowledging the defendant's mental problems, attempted to achieve a mitigation of the sentence, arguing that his actions were the result of a difficult childhood and untreated mental disorders. However, the jury was not convinced by these arguments, especially after viewing video recordings that showed the cold-blooded methodology of his actions. On the 7th of February 2024, Robert Clark was found guilty on all charges. Judge Alexandra Martinez sentenced him to 25 years imprisonment with mandatory psychiatric treatment and subsequent 5-year supervision after release. A permanent restraining order was also issued prohibiting him from any contact with the Thompson family. "Your actions show a high degree of danger to society," declared the judge at the sentencing. "Systematic persecution, interference in a family's private life, planning of a kidnapping. All this indicates the necessity of prolonged isolation for the protection of potential victims and to provide the necessary treatment for you." For the Thompson family, the verdict brought a sense of relief, but not complete liberation from fear. "We were told that it would take time to fully recover," says Laura, "especially for Emily." A trauma of this kind does not simply disappear because the perpetrator is behind bars. Emily continued working with a child psychologist to gradually overcome the consequences of the experienced stress. Her nocturnal awakening at 3:17 became increasingly rare, although it did not completely stop. A particular progress was that she began sleeping in her room again, albeit only with the nightlight on and under the condition that the door remained open. "We are trying to return to normalcy step by step," reports Eric. "New curtains, furniture rearrangement, fresh paint on the walls, everything to make the room look different and create new associations." Meanwhile, the story of Robert Clark continued to unfold, bringing new disturbing discoveries. Analysis of his computer revealed connections to online communities specializing in surveillance methods and breaking into private homes. Police discovered that he participated in forums under various pseudonyms, sharing techniques for bypassing security systems and methods for unnoticed observation of objects. This was not an isolated case of mental disorder, concludes investigator Jenkins. Clark specifically sought information and communities that could help him with persecution. He knew his actions were illegal and actively learned to avoid arrest. Even more disturbing was the discovery of an encrypted part of Clark's hard drive, which specialists only managed to decrypt in March 2024. There were detailed dossiers not only on the Thompson family, but also on 6 other families with small children living in 3 different states. Each dossier contained photos, addresses, daily routines, and Clark's notes about vulnerabilities in their security systems. "We have discovered that the Thompsons were not his first target," says Captain Rodriguez. Before them, he stalked the Campbell family from Ohio, but stopped after they moved to another state. It seems that he methodically selected potential targets and moved on to the next one when the first became inaccessible. This information confirmed the investigators' original fears. Robert Clark was not just a person with a mental disorder who was obsessed with a specific family. He was a serial stalker who had developed a systematic approach to selecting victims and preparing crimes. By combining information from his computer with data from unsolved cases in various jurisdictions, the police connected Clark to 12 cases of stalking in the last 10 years. In 5 cases, the cases were closed due to lack of evidence. In 3 cases, the victims did not file official reports out of fear of consequences. And in 4 cases, the families moved to escape the threat. This is a classic example of how serial stalkers can remain undetected for long periods, explains criminal psychologist Dr. Michael Brandt. They are smart enough not to cross certain boundaries, often change locations and methods, and their victims frequently prefer to simply move away rather than go through a complex process of criminal prosecution. In April 2024, when it seemed that the case was finally closed, an incident occurred that stirred up the Thompson family's concerns again. Emily, who had not woken up at 3:17 for several weeks, suddenly sat up in bed in the middle of the night and spoke clearly. "He has found another child." After that, she lay down again and slept deeply. And in the morning, she remembered nothing. The parents, disturbed by this episode, contacted Dr. Cohen, who continued to work with Emily. The psychologist suspected that this could simply be a residual manifestation of the trauma, especially given the fact that the family had discussed the news about the Clark case at dinner the evening before. Investigator Jenkins, who learned of this incident, decided to check the condition of the prisoner. What he discovered prompted him to immediately strengthen the security measures around the Thompson family. It turned out that Robert Clark had established contact with another inmate, Victor Rains, who was to be released in 2 weeks. The prison records documented their regular conversations in the common area, and the analysis of Rains' letters, which were intercepted by the administration, revealed hidden messages to a certain Mark, with instructions to check a specific post, office box after release. Clark was trying to use Rains as an intermediary to continue surveillance of the Thompson family, explains investigator Jenkins. This was not unusual. Criminals of his type often look for ways to maintain control over the situation even from prison. The police monitored the specified post office box and arrested Rains 3 days after his release when he attempted to retrieve the contents. Inside were detailed instructions from Clark, including the Thompsons' address, house plans, and instructions for observing Emily. Additionally, there was an envelope with $5,000 in cash, money that, as it later turned out, Clark had saved while working in the warehouse before his arrest. Rains, who had previously been convicted of minor offenses, was not an ideological accomplice of Clark's. He had simply agreed to check on a friend's family for money, without being particularly interested in the details or motives. After his arrest, he cooperated fully with the investigation and provided information about all conversations with Clark and his plans. This incident confirmed what we knew about people like Clark, says Dr. Brandt. Their obsession does not stop with isolation. They continue to look for ways to maintain the illusion of control, often by using intermediaries or manipulating others to achieve their goals. After this discovery, Robert Clark was transferred to a high-security prison with restricted contacts. His correspondence and phone calls were more heavily censored, and access to other inmates was minimized. Despite these measures, he maintained a disturbing calm and claimed during sessions with the prison psychiatrist that everything is going according to plan. In summer 2024, the Thompson family's life gradually began to return to normal. They still maintained enhanced security measures, but no longer felt the constant presence of a threat. Emily returned to school, found new friends, and began swimming. An activity that, according to Dr. Cohen, helped her wash the fear from her body. Her nighttime awakening at 3:17 stopped completely, which psychologists considered a significant indicator of recovery. The child's body has finally received the signal that the danger is over, explains Dr. Cohen. This does not mean that the trauma is completely healed, but it indicates the formation of new, healthy neural connections. Eric and Laura also worked on restoring their mental well-being and attended therapy for parents of children who had experienced trauma. "We are learning not to pass our fears on to our daughter," says Laura. "It's difficult because you instinctively want to protect Emily from everything, want to be hyper-vigilant. But we understand that excessive protection can become a new form of trauma." In August 2024, almost a year after the nightmare began, the Thompson family took an important step. They sold the house and moved to another city. This decision was not made out of fear, but as a conscious choice to begin a new chapter of life without constant reminders of the past. "We are not fleeing. emphasizes Eric. We are moving forward. The house that was once our refuge became a place full of heavy memories. Emily deserves to grow up in a space that is not marked by fear. Their new house, in a picturesque suburb 3 hours' drive from Middletown, was chosen taking into account all security aspects without turning it into a fortress. A modern surveillance system was discreetly installed without constantly reminding of potential dangers. Emily's room was completely renovated according to her wishes, creating a space that is associated only with positive emotions. This was a collective work of psychologists, security experts, and of course Emily herself, reports Laura. We wanted her to feel control over her space, which is especially important after a trauma that was connected with the violation of boundaries. The Middletown police finally closed the Clark case in September 2024, although they continued to use the materials obtained for investigating other stalking cases connected to him. Investigator Jenkins, who maintained contact with the Thompson family, regularly informed them about Clark's status and made sure that all security measures remained active. Such cases never end completely, he explains. We have learned valuable lessons that will help protect other families from similar stalkers. This is cold comfort for those who have already suffered, but an important step toward preventing future crimes. The last significant episode in this story occurred on the 17th of October 2024. Exactly 1 year after, Emily had managed to capture the man at the window on video. On this day, Laura received an anonymous letter that had been sent from a city in 2 states away from them. Inside was only a photo of their new house, taken from the street, without captions or threats. The police immediately began investigations. A check was conducted of all of Clark's contacts in prison, all of his known associates and former cellmates who had recently been released. The analysis of the envelope and the photo revealed fingerprints that did not match any entry in the database. We tend to assume that it could be an uninvolved person who knows the case from the news and decided to make a cruel joke, says Captain Rodriguez. Such incidents are not uncommon in sensational cases. There are people who find perverse pleasure in frightening crime victims. Nevertheless, surveillance around the Thompson house was increased, and the local police were informed about the potential threat. The family itself decided not to give in to fear and viewed the incident as another test on the path to recovery. One cannot allow fear to control our lives again, says Eric. We have lived through and survived a real nightmare. If someone thinks they can intimidate us with a photo, they underestimate the strength we have gained. Emily, now 7 years old, continues to show remarkable resilience. Her drawings, which were once filled with dark figures at the window, now depict vibrant scenes from everyday life: school, friends, family picnics. The man at the window gradually becomes a distant memory and no longer a defining element of her life. Children possess an amazing ability to recover, notes Dr. Cohen. They do not forget traumatic experiences, but can integrate them into a broader life picture without allowing them to dominate. Emily is learning that safety and fear can coexist, and that makes her stronger. In November 2024, Robert Clark unexpectedly filed an application for review of his case, claiming that new evidence could justify his actions. The court rejected this application without examination and recognized it as an attempt to manipulate the justice system. The psychiatrists who observed him determined that this is typical behavior for a narcissistic personality that is unable to accept loss of control and defeat. As of December 2024, Robert Clark continues to serve his 25-year prison sentence in a maximum security prison. According to reports from the prison administration, he remains isolated from other inmates due to attempts to manipulate them. His mental state is described as stable, but without signs of improvement or acceptance of responsibility for his actions. The Thompson family, overcoming the consequences of what they experienced, has found a new goal: helping other victims of persecution. Eric and Laura founded the non-profit organization Safe Space that provides legal and psychological support for families confronted with similar situations. Their story, told with their consent in a documentary film, helped draw attention to the problem of persecution and the need to improve legislation in this area. "We did not choose this role," says Laura. "But if our experience can help other families avoid what we went through, then this whole nightmare was not in vain." The epilogue of this story remains open. For the Thompson family, life continues and gradually pushes back the shadows of the past. For the justice system, the Clark case became an important precedent that changed the approach to investigating persecution cases. And for society, it is a reminder that sometimes the worst threats do not lurk in a child's imagination, but at the window at 3:17 at night, patiently waiting for the moment to enter. As investigator Jenkins noted in his last interview about the case, the story of the man at the window is not just a criminal chronicle. It is a warning about how important it is to listen to our children's fears, even when they seem unfounded. Sometimes monsters are real, and our task is to protect the most vulnerable from their shadow. On the 8th of October 2017, 5:47 in the morning, Highway, Cunter 76, suburb of Philadelphia. Truck driver Thomas Bennett stopped his truck at the roadside when he noticed a woman walking along the edge of the road. In the dawn, she was walking barefoot, dressed in a faded blue dress that was unsuitable for the autumn coolness. As Bennett approached, the woman did not react to his presence. Her gaze was directed into emptiness. "She moved like in a dream," Bennett recalls. "I asked if she needed help, but she only repeated the same sentence over and over again. Mama must be back for dinner. I understood that something was wrong and called the police. The arriving patrol officers found the woman in a state of severe disorientation. She had no documents with her and could not give her name. On her left wrist, a scar from handcuffs was visible. Under her nails were traces of earth, as if she had been digging with bare hands for a long time. The woman was immediately taken to Montgomery Memorial Hospital. The attending physician, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, documented numerous puncture marks on both arms of the patient. Blood analysis showed the presence of benzodiazepines and haloperidol, a strong combination of sedative and antipsychotic medications. The woman was exhausted, with signs of vitamin deficiency and dehydration. When the effect of the medications wore off, she began to repeat the name Alice, notes Dr. Shaw. We were not sure whether she was naming herself or someone else. Through the fingerprint system, the police established the woman's identity. It was Lauren Marks, 37 years old, elementary school teacher from Westchester, Pennsylvania. According to police reports, Marks had been missing for 7 months. She disappeared on the 3rd of March 2017 after a parent-teacher conference at school. Lauren's husband, James Marks, came to the hospital immediately. The meeting of the spouses, which was recorded by the hospital camera, became the first oddity in this case. She looked at her husband like a stranger, tells investigator Rachel Morris, who was first assigned to this case. When he tried to hug her, she backed away and screamed, "You are not the father. Where is the real father?" In the next 48 hours, Lauren's condition remained unstable. Periods of relative clarity of consciousness alternated with episodes of panic and disorientation. In moments of clarity, she spoke sentences that seemed incoherent. Grandmother didn't wake up after the injection. Papa said we must smile in photos. Children may not cry at the table. The doctors diagnosed Lauren with post-traumatic stress, disorder and amnesia caused by long-term intake of psychotropic substances. However, the real breakthrough in the case occurred on the 3rd day when a nurse discovered that Lauren was hiding something in the folds of her hospital clothing. It was a photo folded 3 times. On it was depicted a group of 5 people: an elderly woman, a middle-aged man, a woman, Lauren herself, a teenage boy, and Alice. They stood in front of a suburban-style house and held hands. All wore identical blue sweaters and smiled into the camera. But their eyes seemed empty and their postures unnaturally stiff. On the back of the photo was an inscription, "My perfect family. Day 156. When investigators showed the photo to James Marks, he recognized no one except his wife. It proved impossible to identify the other people in the photo. Their faces matched no record in the missing persons database. Who were these people? What did Day 156 mean? And most importantly, who had created this perfect family? After the discovery of the photo, the investigation took a new direction. Investigator Morris and her new partner, Investigator Michael Chen, began with a thorough analysis of the missing persons within 100 miles of the location where Lauren Marks was found. "We were looking for specific patterns," explains Chen. "People of different age groups who disappeared without apparent reason, without signs of struggle or suspicious activities before their disappearance. In the last 3 years, more than 200 people had disappeared in the region. Most cases had ordinary explanations: runaway teenagers, family conflicts, financial problems. But 22 cases stood out due to their inexplicability. People simply disappeared from their daily lives, after work, during an ordinary walk on the way home from shopping. Particular attention was drawn to 6 missing person cases. Richard Goldman, 46 years old, accountant, disappeared on the 5th of January 2015 after a workday. Eleanor Washington, 68 years old, retiree, disappeared on the 14th of April 2015 from her house. Ethan Clayton, 14 years old, student, disappeared on the 7th of September 2015 on the way from school. Sophie Anderson, 9 years old, elementary school, student, disappeared on the 12th of February 2016 from a playground. Margaret Thompson, 72 years old, retiree, disappeared on the 28th of July 2016 from a nursing home. Lauren Marks, 37 years old, teacher, disappeared on the 3rd of March 2017. At first glance, they had nothing in common, says Morris. Different age, social status, places of residence. But when we compared their photos with the image of the perfect family, we discovered matches of types. Each missing person could be one of the people in the photo. Furthermore, the chronology of the disappearances indicated a methodical approach by the kidnapper. First, the father disappeared, then the grandmother, the son, the daughter, and finally, the mother. When the first grandmother, Eleanor Washington, disappeared from the family, a replacement was kidnapped, Margaret Thompson. Particularly disturbing was the discovery made during a renewed review of street camera footage in the area where Lauren had been found. On one of the recordings made 36 hours before Lauren's discovery, a black SUV was seen stopping at the roadside. From it was unloaded a large bundle that resembled a lifeless body and left in the roadside ditch. The vehicle's license plate proved to be forged. The examination of the soil found under Lauren's fingernails showed the presence of specific minerals and organic compounds characteristic of agricultural areas in Chester County. This narrowed the search area but still left hundreds of square miles of potential territory. Lauren Marks' condition gradually improved. On the 10th day after her discovery, she was able to make the first coherent statements. "I remember a sound," she told the investigators. "Every morning at 6:40 a train passed by. That was my alarm clock." The father demanded that breakfast be on the table at 7 o'clock. When investigators asked whom she referred to as father, Lauren answered, "The person who created us. He said we were his true family, that he had chosen us." Lauren remembered that they were kept in a 2-story house with a basement, located in a rural area. The house was surrounded by cornfields. She particularly clearly remembered an old oak tree with a split trunk that was visible from the only window in the basement where they were held when they were not playing family. He said we should be grateful, Lauren continued. That he had saved us from loneliness and given us a perfect family. That he had tried it before with others, but they hadn't managed it. This statement prompted the investigators to consider, were there also other families before this one? How many people could have gone through this nightmare? Meanwhile, the forensic laboratory completed the analysis of the photo. The experts determined that the image was taken with a Nikon D3500 camera and printed on paper that is available in any major supermarket. On the back of the photo, however, microscopic soil particles were discovered that were identical to those found under Lauren's fingernails, as well as traces of a particular type of mold, Stachybotrys chartarum, which typically develops in old, damp rooms. Another detail caught the investigators' attention. In the lower right corner of the photo, the emblem of a real estate company on a for sale sign in front of the house is partially visible. The experts were able to identify the logo as that of Home Find Realty, a real estate agency operating in 5 districts of Pennsylvania. Meanwhile, a report came from the Montgomery County Children's Hospital about an unusual patient. Sophia, who was 9 years old, was brought to the emergency room with symptoms that suspiciously resembled drug poisoning. A farmer had found her at the edge of his field, about 40 miles from where Lauren was found. When investigators Morris and Chen arrived at the hospital, they were shocked. Sophia wore a blue dress, identical to the one Lauren Marks was wearing. And most importantly, she matched the description of Sophie Anderson, who had disappeared 7 months ago. On Sophia's left wrist, the same scar from a handcuff was visible as on Lauren. When the doctors removed her dress, they discovered a fresh tattoo on her back. Daughter, property of the family. The discovery of Sophie Anderson provided the investigation with crucially important information. Unlike Lauren, Sophie remembered more details despite the obvious psychological trauma. "The bad person took us away from our real parents," she said when she could speak. "He said that we are now his real family because he chose us." Sophie told that the father forced them to live according to a strict schedule. Every day they had to portray a happy family, have breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, play board games, watch old family shows on television. On Sundays, he photographed them and marked Family Day on the calendar. "When we did something wrong, he gave us medicine so we would be obedient," Sophie continued. "Grandmother didn't wake up after the medicine, and he brought a new grandmother." Sophie could remember that from the window of the basement where they were held when they weren't playing family. Not only a split oak tree was visible, but also railroad tracks. A passenger train passed by in the morning and evening, a freight train 3 times a day. This information made it possible to significantly narrow the search area. Meanwhile, the analysis of the Home Find Realty real estate agency database revealed that the company had sold 87 properties in rural areas of Chester and Lancaster counties over the past 3 years. Of these, 14 houses were located near railroad tracks, and only 3 had large trees in the yard. When investigators showed Sophie and Lauren photos of these houses, both independently pointed to the same image: a 2-story white house with blue shutters located on Miller Road, 5 miles from the nearest town. According to the database, the house was sold in January 2015 to a certain Daniel Harper. A check revealed that Daniel Harper was a fictitious person, created with forged documents. However, the real estate agent who handled the sale remembered this customer well. He was very specific in his requirements, recalls Linda Perkins, agent at Home Find Realty. He needed an isolated house with a basement, far from neighbors. He said he wanted peace for his family. He looked absolutely normal, friendly. He paid in cash. A task force prepared a plan to storm the house on Miller Road. Using thermal imaging cameras, the police discovered the presence of several people in the building. On the 22nd of October 2017, at 5:30 in the morning, a special unit surrounded the house. Through loudspeakers, the perpetrator was offered to surrender, but no response followed. After entering the house, the forces found 3 people chained to beds in the basement: an elderly woman, identified as Margaret Thompson, a middle-aged man, Richard Goldman, and a teenager, Ethan Clayton. All were under the influence of strong sedatives. On the back of each person was a tattoo marking their role in the family. The kidnapper himself was not found. Surveillance cameras in the house recorded how 30 minutes before the operation, a man left the building through a secret passage in the basement that led to the forest behind the house. In the main bedroom, investigators found a kind of altar, a wall completely covered with photos of the family from different days. In each image, 5 people stood in the same pose, with the same smiles. But the faces changed periodically, as if actors in a long-running series were replaced by new ones without changing the plot. Next to the bed lay an album with newspaper clippings about missing persons. Some were circled in red with annotations: possible mother, ideal son, too old for grandmother. But the most disturbing discovery awaited the investigators in the basement. Behind a false wall, they discovered a small room equipped with a refrigerator. Inside were containers with human organs and tissues, carefully labeled with dates and names. He preserved parts of those who couldn't cope with their role, explains criminal psychologist Dr. Sarah Levin. In his disturbed consciousness, this was a way to keep them as part of the family, even after they had disappointed him. The forensic examination identified the remains of 7 people who were reported missing between 2014 and 2017. All corresponded to the roles in the perfect family. A thorough examination of the house uncovered hidden cameras in every room, recording everything 24 hours a day. On the computer hard drives, investigators found hundreds of hours of video recordings of family life, meals, games, television watching. All actions seemed mechanical, unnatural, as if following a script. Recordings of punishments were also found. Victims who refused to play their roles were forced into obedience through deprivation of food, water, or injections of various preparations. Some recordings broke off when a family member stopped moving. Of particular interest to the investigation were the daily video diaries of the kidnapper, which he recorded in his bedroom. On them, a middle-aged man with ordinary appearance spoke about his mission to create a perfect family. "Today is day 178, he said in one of the recordings. "The mother is still resisting. I may need to find a replacement. The daughter is adapting best, beginning to call me Papa, even without reminders. Grandmother sleeps too much. I will increase the dose of stimulants." But who was this man? And what prompted him to create this nightmarish world? The analysis of fingerprints in the house led to an unexpected discovery. They belonged to Simon Baker, 41 years old, a former employee of the Montgomery County Social Services. According to official records, Baker quit his job in December 2014 after 12 years of exemplary service. He was a quiet, competent employee, recalls his former supervisor Diana Miller. He specialized in cases where children were taken from problematic families. He never aroused suspicion. Colleagues described Baker as a reserved person without close friends, but always polite and helpful. He never spoke about his family or past. He lived alone in a rented apartment and had no serious relationships. The only oddity that some noticed was his obsession with television shows from the 1950s and 60s that portrayed idealized family life. The investigation of Simon Baker's biography revealed a heartbreaking story. Born 1976 in Scranton, Pennsylvania, he was the oldest of 3 children in the Baker family. In the year 1983, when Simon was 7 years old, his father, who suffered from bipolar disorder, killed his mother and the 2 younger children in a state of psychosis before committing suicide. Simon, who had hidden in a closet, remained the only survivor. After the tragedy, the boy was placed in the foster system. In the next 11 years, he changed 7 foster families. In the reports of social workers, his withdrawn nature, difficulties in building emotional bonds, and a compulsive need for structured daily routine were recorded. In adolescence, he made detailed drawings of the perfect family, tells Dr. Martin Goldstein, a psychiatrist who worked with Simon from 1988 to 90. He fantasized about a family where no one ever argued, where everyone fulfilled their roles. That was his way of dealing with the trauma. After college graduation, Baker seemed to have overcome his past. He earned a degree in social work and began a career in the child protection system. Colleagues described him as a dedicated professional who was particularly effective in the most difficult cases. In the year 2014, however, an incident occurred that, according to psychologists, might have been a trigger. Baker dealt with the case of the Knight family, in which the father allegedly used violence against his wife and children. Despite Baker's recommendation to remove the children, the court left them with the parents. 1 month later, the father killed the entire family and himself, a scenario that painfully reminded of Simon's own trauma. 2 weeks after that, Baker resigned. And in January 2015, he bought a house on Miller Road under a false name and began creating his perfect family. The analysis of Baker's computers and documents showed that he carefully selected his victims. He used access to databases and his skills as a social worker to identify people who were suitable for his plan. Then he observed them for weeks and studied their habits before carrying out the kidnapping. Particularly shocking was the discovery of earlier experiments. According to found diaries, Baker began with creating temporary families. He kidnapped homeless people, gave them drugs, and forced them to play roles for several days before releasing them with altered memory of what had happened. These cases were never investigated because the victims either could not remember details or were afraid to go to the police. By 2015, Baker had decided to create a permanent family. His method became increasingly sophisticated. He used a combination of preparations for behavioral control of the victims, strong enough to suppress resistance, but not so strong that they lost the ability to fulfill their roles. He created his version of a reality show, explains criminal psychologist Dr. Levin. But instead of actors, he used kidnapped people, and instead of a script, his childish fantasy of the perfect family that he never had. A particularly disturbing aspect of the case was the discovery of a list of candidates for replacing current family members. Baker had already selected a new mother and grandmother, observed them, and prepared for the kidnapping. On his computer's hard drive, photos of more than 30 potential victims were found, taken with hidden cameras in public places. The Federal Bureau of Investigation issued a nationwide search for Simon Baker. His photos were distributed to all law enforcement agencies in the country. On the 25th of October 2017, only 3 days after the storm on the house on Miller Road, there was an unexpected turn. The police of Baltimore, Maryland received a call from a motel on the outskirts of the city. A chambermaid discovered in one of the rooms the body of a man who had committed suicide. Next to it lay a note. "Without my family, life has no meaning. Maybe next time I'll do everything right." The body was identified as Simon Baker. The investigation revealed that he had watched news reports about the rescue of his victims, whereupon he acquired a gun from an illegal dealer and booked a room in the motel under a false name. In the room, investigators found a stack of photos of the perfect family and a detailed plan for creating a new family in another state. Next to them lay newspaper clippings with advertisements for the sale of isolated houses in rural Virginia. The case of the perfect family did not end with the death of Simon Baker. For the surviving victims, it was only the beginning of a long road to recovery. Richard Goldman, Margaret Thompson, and Ethan Clayton, who were rescued during the storming of the house, joined Lauren Marks and Sophie Anderson in a specialized rehabilitation center. They all suffered from a combination of physical problems caused by long-term intake of psychotropic medications and severe psychological trauma. The most difficult thing for them was the return to consciousness of their own identity, explains Dr. Elizabeth Wright, the head of the psychology team that worked with the victims. Baker not only held them physically captive, he systematically destroyed their self-perception by forcing them to assume roles in his fantasy. All 5 surviving victims showed symptoms similar to Stockholm Syndrome, especially Sophie and Ethan, who had been in captivity the longest relative to their age. They felt complicated feelings toward their kidnapper. Fear, hatred, but sometimes also dependency. He was a monster, but every day he said he loved us, that we were special, that he had chosen us, Sophie confessed during a therapeutic session. Sometimes I miss him, and then I hate myself for it. The return to families proved to be no less complicated a process. Relatives who had waited for their loved ones for years faced people who had changed beyond recognition. Some victims initially did not recognize their own family members or met them with distrust. Particularly difficult was the situation of those whose relatives had died in Baker's experiment. The families of Eleanor Washington and other victims, whose remains were found in the basement of the house, demanded answers. Why the system could not protect their loved ones and prevent the tragedy. The investigation revealed serious deficiencies in coordination between law enforcement agencies of different jurisdictions. Disappearances that happened in different districts and states were processed in isolation, without analysis of possible connections between them. Baker knew the weaknesses of the system and used them, notes federal agent Michael Donovan, who coordinated the interagency investigation group. He deliberately selected victims from different districts and even states to make identification of patterns more difficult. Particular concern was raised by the fact that Baker, as a former social worker, used his professional knowledge for his crimes. He had access to confidential information about potential victims, knew the procedures for investigating missing persons and the working methods of the police. In response to this case, the Federal Bureau of Investigation created a special database for tracking kidnappings with unusual circumstances, and the Department of Social Services revised the protocols for employee screening and monitoring access to confidential information. The psychological analysis of Baker's diaries and video recordings revealed the complex portrait of a person who was traumatized in his childhood and had created a parallel reality to compensate for his losses. In his disturbed consciousness, he did not consider himself a criminal, explains Dr. Levin. He believed that he was saving these people from an imperfect world by giving them a real family. The tragedy of the Knight family was probably the catalyst that finally destroyed the boundary between his fantasy and reality. For many, the contrast between Baker's abhorrent acts and his ordinary appearance, his professional successes, and the absence of a criminal past was shocking. This prompted society to reconsider stereotypical notions of how a dangerous perpetrator should look and behave. The most disturbing thing about this story is that Simon Baker could have been anyone, notes Dr. Wright. Your colleague, neighbor, someone you meet daily at the bus stop. No one saw his true face behind the mask of normality. 1 year after the events, all 5 surviving victims continue to be in rehabilitation. For some, progress is slow. Margaret Thompson, the oldest victim, suffers from irreversible cognitive impairments caused by long-term intake of psychotropic medications. Ethan Clayton, who spent almost 2 years in captivity during a critical phase of his development, has difficulties with socialization and learning. Richard Goldman struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder and cannot return to his former work. However, there are also stories of hope. Sophie Anderson shows remarkable resilience despite the nightmare she experienced. With the help of therapy and family support, she is gradually returning to a normal life, although she is still plagued by nightmares. Lauren Marks, whose escape marked the beginning of the case's exposure, became an active advocate for the rights of kidnapping victims. She founded a foundation to support survivors after long captivity and their families. He wanted us to be his perfect family, says Lauren. But a real family does not consist of smiles in photos or identical sweaters. It is about security, love, and acceptance. That is something no kidnapper can give, no matter how many sedatives he administers. The case of the perfect family has changed the methods for investigating missing persons and raised important questions about the psychological consequences of childhood trauma, the vulnerability of social protection systems, and society's blind spots that allow monsters to hide behind the mask of the everyday. The house on Miller Road was demolished by court order. In its place, the community plans to build a memorial garden in memory of the victims and as a reminder of the vigilance required to protect the most valuable thing: human freedom and dignity. But the most disturbing question remains unanswered. How many Simon Bakers are still hiding among us, creating their twisted fantasies behind the closed doors of ordinary houses?